Hi everybody, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here, and today we're going to do a lecture on the Horwitz bishops. So this is something a bit different. Usually I'm presenting one of my games or some opening thing like the Quick Rui series, or years ago the Quick Sicilian series, but I thought I would do something thematic this time, and maybe a little bit more beginner to intermediate friendly than my usual. So usually my stuff is a bit more towards the advanced end of the spectrum. So this, I think, will be especially useful, I hope, at any rate, for more of beginner players, although I think there'll be some interesting things here for, of course, players who are stronger than the beginner level, too. So Horwitz bishops are bishops that are side by side. They're on adjacent diagonals, and we'll see a bunch of examples of this. It's named for Bernhard Horwitz, or Horwitz, I guess, would be a better pronunciation, a strong German master in the mid-19th century. One thing that's interesting about this label of Horwitz bishops is that I didn't do a tremendous amount of research, but I probably spent about 20 to 30 minutes trying to figure out why these adjacent bishops are called Horwitz bishops. I did a search in the mega database for all of Horwitz's wins. There aren't an awful lot of games there. I only found, I think, 50 games or thereabouts. And so I went through all these games trying to find some victory where his bishops are on adjacent diagonals and they just crush the opponent. And I couldn't find any. And I looked in Golombek's old Encyclopedia of Chess and did a quick search on the web and couldn't find anything. So if you guys know what the game or games are that he played that generated this label, please, let everyone know in the comments section for this video. But as I said, I couldn't find it. Maybe another thought I had is that he might have written about it. Maybe he wrote an article on this. I know or at least I believe he wrote some kind of primer. Maybe in this primer for beginners he discussed it. So perhaps that's the origin of this label. At any rate, I don't know. But let's just jump into the examples now. And the first one I'm going to show you is from some opening theory. So this illustrates in a really very vivid fashion the power that these adjacent bishops can have against an enemy king that's castled. So this is from the Danish Gambit, which is characterized by black gobbling all of the pawns on the diagonal. And now the standard recipe here, in case you ever see this, I don't know if this is certainly not the only good way to play, but this is kind of standard to play d5 here, and then knight f6, giving up the second pawn back. It's not really sacrificing the queen, it's just temporary. Now the rook hits the queen, so this comes back, takes, and so on. So material is equal, but it's really a very imbalanced position. Even this could be kind of fun to play for either side. So the other key antidote to this is after c3 to play d5, which is what I would normally recommend as the easiest equalizer. But anyway, I don't want to get bogged down in opening theory, just letting you guys know, for those of you who haven't seen this before and haven't figured out how to meet it, this is generally considered to be a pretty fair solution. And there's a little bit of theory, but it's very manageable. At any rate, back to the accepted variation. So instead of d5, bishop to b4 check is a very natural move. So not giving back the material, but just trying to develop quickly and get the king out of danger. So knight c3, knight f6, and here white can actually play the very calm knight g to e2. And here, okay, black probably should not take the pawn. So white has pretty decent compensation, but it's certainly still very much a game. But after knight takes e4, black is in trouble. So castles. And now let's say that black takes the philosophy that when you're under attack, it's always a good idea to simplify. So takes and then takes again. And now, of course, get the king out of danger. Get him into safety by castling. Well, here we see a perfect example of Horwitz bishops. So you've got, again, these guys are on adjacent diagonals and ready to cause all kinds of damage to the black king side. But how to put this into action? How do we actually finish the job? Well, the answer is quite simple. Simply queen to g4, threatening mate on g7. The f-pawn cannot be pushed, so there's no f6. And queen f6 just gives up the queen, so that leaves g6. or g5, I guess, although that looks a bit unnatural, and would in any event be met by the same crushing blow, queen of d4. So that just does it. So black is toast here. He can't avoid checkmate. He can delay it by a move with queen to f6. White takes the queen and then mates on g7, or h8 for that matter, on the next turn. So this is a really vivid and almost cartoonishly clear example of the power of the Horwitz bishops. There's another player named Daniel Horwitz. So these two are contemporaries. I believe Horwitz might have been a British player. Remember, he famously played a match against Paul Morphy. The interesting thing about that match was that Horwitz won the first two games against Morphy. The story goes that Morphy told his friends that Horwitz would never win again, and he didn't. So Morphy won, I think, the next 5 games, and then Horwitz quit the match. Or he won five straight decisive games. I think there might have been a draw or two in there. Okay, so Horwitz bishops. All right, so that's this example. Let's move on to another one now. And this one is a very, very famous example. Lasker against Bauer. So everyone knows this, or at least everyone who's been around chess for a while knows it, but there's always the first time to see it. And so that makes it worthwhile here. And it's going to set up things we look at later. So Lasker became world champion 5 years later than this game. So at this point, he was merely a talented up-and-comer. All right, and he played f4 in this game, but it's not really part of his regular repertoire. But anyway, this shows the bird opening in its best light by far. All right, takes, queen c6, queen e2, defending against any tricky mating ideas on the long diagonal from black in case the d-pawn moves. So a6, stopping bishop to b5, so white was also threatening to simply win the queen outright. Okay, and now white played knight h5, and black, understandably but incorrectly, took the knight. And here Lasker executed one of the most famous combinations in all of chess. And he gets full marks for this. So nowadays this is just all very obvious. A weak club player will knock this out himself in no time at all. It's become just kind of a stereotypical trick, just part of every chess player's toolkit. But at the time, this was brand new, so Lasker gets full marks for finding this combination. So he takes, and that sacrifice is known, but it was the two bishop sacrifice that was new. And so we see these two bishops strafing the black king side, and here, rather than being the pieces that strike the decisive blow, in the sense of delivering the mate or helping to deliver the mate, they open the way for the major pieces instead. So queen check, rook f3, threatening rook to h3 mate. And here black is slightly fortunate to have e5, so he can block with the queen and avoid the immediate mate. However, the downside of this is that after rook takes, king takes, white has this last little tactical point, without which black would be more or less okay. But this picks up a piece, and the result is that white will have a queen for, a queen and a couple of pawns for a rook and a bishop, not anywhere near enough for black, and really the game could have been ended at this point, but Bauer decided to kick around for a bit without so much as a shred of hope. Really, I have no idea why he's playing this out, except maybe that Lasker was just so young that he thought he could try it, but now it's really absurd. Just very bad manners, but anyway, such is life. The guy plays it out, and there, queen takes d3 is a nice way of really kind of emphasizing the point. Bauer can have the queen back, but there's no hope. All right, so a very clean, very easy win by Lasker, but the key thing is to see, again, the power of these bishops, that when they're pointing at the enemy king side, and there are really very few defenders, great things can happen if you're the attacking side. All right, this next example is almost as famous, and black is the winner in this case. This was played between Aaron Nimzowitsch, who had white, and Siegbert Tarasch, the great German grandmaster with black. So, in fact, both sides play an opening where they get the Horwitz bishops. So the question is, whose Horwitz bishops are going to be better? And in this case, it turned out to be Tarasch's. Okay, so here yeah, Nimzovich is playing really very much for the static elements in the position. So black has these hanging pawns on c5 and d5, and often it's a very good policy to just attack them head on if you can, if you've got enough force to apply to them. And if you can force one pawn or the other to advance, then they can become quite weak and create all kinds of weaknesses around them, in addition to the pawns being weak. But here it just doesn't work out for Nimzovich. So you can see there's very little pressure on the black pawns, but now they do advance with d4. And this is just an unshielding operation, so he's clearing the path for the bishop on c6 to set up, just as in Lasker Bauer, the two bishop sacrifice. And here, if white takes, then queen g4 check, rook to d5, and this time there's no defense involving giving up the queen. This is just mating. So instead, Nimzovich played f3, and here a very nice move by Tarsh. He plays rook f to e8. So now, if king takes g2, rook e2 check is going to be mating at most two moves. Okay, Tarsh plays knight e4, but now Tarsh is able to cash in. If rook takes f1, then queen h2 check, and the queen on c2 drops off. So he tries d5, and now all of a sudden it looks like it might still be interesting, with ideas with knight f6 check or queen c3 up in the air. But in fact, there's not going to be any such luck. So f5 neutralizes the knight f6 idea. So if white were to play it, then black would simply recapture on e8 and then threaten queen g2 mate. And again, if rook f1, then queen h2 check and queen takes c2. So Nimzovich tried his last ditch effort here with queen to c3, threatening mate. Black is going to have to do everything with checks, but he can and does. So queen to g2 check. If the king goes to e1, then queen e2 is mate. So he plays king e3, hoping to kind of wiggle around to f4 and just escape on the dark squares. But it's not going to happen. Rook e4 check, f e4. And now the fastest win would have been queen g3 check, queen f2 check, and queen e2 mate. So instead, Tarsh played f4. It's a little slower, but it's good enough. King f4, rook f8. If king e3, then queen to e2 is mate. So king e5. Now queen h2 check. White can block with the queen, but that just wastes a move. So king e6 is the only sensible try. Rook e8. And now if king f6, then queen f4 is mate. So we went to d7, pardon me. And now bishop to b5 is checkmate. So a very nice win by Tarsh. And again, it shows the power of these bishops, these Horwitz bishops. And it also introduces us to this motif of playing d4 as a pawn sack to unleash the second diagonal. Okay, on to the next one. This is perhaps the most famous game, I think, with Horwitz bishops doing their thing. So this is Rotlevi against Rubinstein, the so-called Polish Immortal, or Rubinstein's Immortal game, played in Lodz in 1907. So we've got this kind of symmetrical position. Actually, let me go back to here and say that in these positions, white should play a3. So that when he plays dc5, he can play a3 and b4. Well, actually, there's a second point to it as well, which is that black will often have to spend a tempo of his own. So both sides want to delay developing their king bishop, hoping that the other guy will take on c5 or c4 first, and then the bishop can just come out without loss of time. Although actually the way Rotlevi did it is okay still at this point. So a6, a3, a6, b4. So it's still a transposition. Bishop to b2, castles. Here though, white should probably just play c takes d5 and then bishop to e2. This would be, I think, the best way to handle the position. Instead, he played queen at e2, and I think his idea is that he wanted to play rook to d1, put pressure on the d file, and force black to play d takes c4, when both sides would be even as far as the tempo count goes with the captures on c5 and c4 respectively. But Rubinstein found a nice refutation, so he plays queen to e7, and now if rook to d1, then rook to d8 is entirely good, and the white battery on the d file amounts to nothing, and the queen is misplaced on d2. So here, Rotlevi decided to play bishop to d3, just trying to get developed here, but then it means he's lost this move with the bishop. So now Rubinstein takes, plays b5. Bishop went back to d3, and now rook to d8. And getting out of the way, Rotlevi plays queen to e2. And Rubinstein now plays bishop to b7, and white castles. So we can say that this has been just extraordinarily unsuccessful opening play by white. The position is almost completely symmetrical, except that black is up a couple of tempi here. So instead of, if you put the black rook on f8 and make it white's move, then it would be normal, but black already has his rook on d8, and it's his move too. So really very, very bad opening play by white here. So knight to e5 was played, unleashing his Horwitz bishops. Takes. And now Rotlevi thought he was regaining the initiative with f4 and then e4. So he's managed to push black back a little bit. He's expanded in the center. And after rook a to c8, he expands further with e5. So what could be nicer? So this time we're not going to have Horwitz bishops of the flavor that we had in the Lasker-Bauer and Nimzovich-Tarash games, because the b8-h2 diagonal has been closed. But there's a second adjacent diagonal, and this proves to be quite dangerous as well. Bishop to b6 check, king h1, and now knight to g4. So this really initiates all kinds of bad news for white. Now, the idea of this move is to play queen to h4. And if white takes on g4, well, rook takes d3 is very good. This rook is quite active and ready to go to d2. The knight on c3 is under attack. So really it has to be said that black is doing extremely well here. All right, there are other things that white can try. I don't want to go through all of the possibilities, but I'll mention also the pawn-winning bishop takes h7 check. King h7, queen g4 is a very bad idea because of rook to d2, hitting b2 and g2. So black is already completely winning here. Well, in the game, Rotlevi played bishop to e4. And it looks like this should be pretty good. So the bishop is no longer attacked on d3. It's no longer loose there. He blocks this diagonal, so it seems like at least one of the Horwitz bishops has been neutralized. And now he threatens to play queen takes g4. Well, black plays queen h4. And the troubles start to mount here. If white plays h3, then, just to give one variation indicating just how much trouble he's in, rook takes c3. White can't play bishop takes b7 because rook or queen takes h3 check. Well, not just check, rook takes, not queen takes. Rook takes pawn, pawn takes, queen takes pawn, and then next is queen takes h2 checkmate. So I guess I can show this. Why not? Mate. All right, so let's say bishop takes c3. Well, now bishop takes e4, queen e4, or queen e4, and then queen to g3. The only answer to queen to h2 mate is to play h takes g4, but then the queen returns to h4, and that's checkmate. Or if queen takes g4, then takes, and rook to d3. And here we see the Horwitz bishops in all their glory. If white saves his bishop, then rook to h3 is checkmate. So one bishop pins the g-pawn, the other prevents the king's escape to the g1 square. So that is a fine illustration of what is wrong with white's position. So after Rubinstein's queen h4, Rotlevi played g3. And now a really spectacular sequence. Really amazing stuff. Rook takes c3. All right, if bishop takes c3, then bishop e4 check. So that was the point of rook c3, or the basic point. It eliminated the knight's defense of the bishop on e4, and so the queen must take on e4, but that's an overload. She no longer protects the pawn on h2, and black takes it with checkmate. All right, so in the game, Rotlevi said, well, thank you very much, I'll take your queen. And now, a second hammer blow, an extraordinary move. Rook to d2. Well, white is up a queen and threatening practically every single one of black's pieces. The only piece that's not attacked is the bishop on b6, but everybody else is. And nevertheless, white is completely lost here. If he plays queen takes g4, then bishop e4 check, rook f3, and then rook takes f3, threatening rook f1 mate. So the Horwitz bishops are really in fine fettle here. If bishop takes c3, giving back the queen but grabbing a rook, it doesn't matter. There's no good answer to the threat of rook takes f2 mate. He can try this little Novotny rook f2, but it doesn't work. Bishop takes, and now bishop f3, and there's no defense to knight h2 mate. And again, the bishops are still doing a great job on their adjacent diagonals. Okay, in the game, also if bishop takes b7, then rook e2, and the threat's rook h2 mate, and if bishop g2, then rook h3. So okay, this line, at least we don't have Horwitz bishops, but the bishop on b6 is still a monster, and 2 rooks and a knight make up for 1 bishop, I guess. All right, so in the game, Rotlevi decided he wanted to die with his stomach full, with his belly full, and he played queen takes d2. Well, now bishop e4 check, queen g2, and finally rook h3. And there's no defense to rook takes h2 mate. White can delay it by a couple of moves, but stopping it is simply impossible. So that, I would say, is the greatest game in chess history involving the Horwitz bishops. Now, another game you might say is a great game involving the Horwitz bishops, but for once seeing the Horwitz bishops not succeed is the evergreen game between Adolf Anderssen and Jean Dufresne, played back in 1852 in Berlin. All right, there are lots of things to criticize in this game, and we won't bother. We'll just get to the spectacular finale. Anyway, we can see here that Black has the Horwitz bishops lined up, ready for action, but his own king has problems that are more pressing. All right, so here you can see that Black is very nicely lined up for all kinds of mischief. He's got his bishops there, the rook on the open file, the queen's ready to take on f3 or maybe go to h3 in some cases. Queen h3 might be a more interesting defense, and rook to g4 has also been proposed as a more resilient try. But okay, let's just see how the game went. So Dufresne played queen takes f3. He's up 2 pieces. He's threatening lots and lots of mates. I mean, queen g2 mate, queen f2 and then queen g2, or rook takes g2, followed by lots of possibilities. But Anderssen had this, of course, foreseen. He knew what he was doing, and he wins in spectacular fashion. Rook takes e7 check, and now Black has some options. In the game, he went down in the most, let's say, principled way, although the easiest way, with knight takes e7. Let's look at a couple of options really quickly, or one option, king to d8. If king f8, just rook takes d7 is easy. So king d8, rook takes d7 anyway. Now, if king takes d7, bishop f5, king e8, bishop d7 check, king d8, bishop c6, king c8, bishop d7, and then you might say that White finishes up with Horwitz bishops of his own, with checkmate. Okay, so that's what happens if king takes d7. If king to c8, well, now White has another glorious move, rook to d8 check. Okay, if rook takes d8, then it's just rather banal. G takes f3, and White wins with the extra material. If knight takes d8, well, then we have this terrific move, queen to d7 check, king d7, bishop f5 check. If the king goes to c6, then bishop to d7 is mate. If the king goes to e8, then bishop to d7 is mate. Very nice. If instead, finally, king takes d8, then bishop to e2 check, and again, it's a more banal conclusion. Actually, it's reasonably close as far as material goes, but the problem is that after this variation concludes, Black's kingside pawns are fairly weak. White is bound to pick up one or the other, and with the 4-on-1, or what will be a 4-on-1 majority, victory is assured. Nevertheless, that would have been a much more resilient try. In the game, as I said, Dufresne played knight takes e7, and now Anderssen finished in spectacular fashion. Queen takes d7 check, king takes d7. And again, if we look at the position for the moment and just ignore that it's White's move and what he's got, it looks amazing for Black. He's up a queen, rook, and a knight, well, for 2 pawns, and both bishops are completely unleashed, and 2 of White's 3 remaining pieces are under attack, and of course f2 and g2 are thoroughly vulnerable, but with bishop to f5 check, White wins. Okay, can't go to b5. If you go to b5, then king e6, and then the king can take on f6 next. So bishop f5 check. If king c6, again, bishop to d7 is mate. We saw something very similar a moment ago. King e8 was what was played. Bishop d7, king f8, king d8 is of course the same, and bishop takes e7 is checkmate. Very elegant, and we can say that white's Horwitz bishops beat black's Horwitz bishops. All right, so that is another, of course, extremely famous game. And I thought I would finish up with a contemporary game. So not just all these old classics that everyone's seen 3,000 times, but we'll do something new too. So what we'll have a look at now is Bologan against Movsesian, played in Sarajevo in 2005. And you can see that even in contemporary chess, the power of the Horwitz bishops is still potentially very significant, and not trivial to neutralize. It can still arise in a number of, or I would say with surprising frequency. All right, so white has set up another version of a Horwitz bishops setup. And here, Bologan plays e4. So we've had kind of like a combination Slav and Zukertort system, and finally white opens the center. And black has lots of options here. And what he chose was probably not the most, probably not the wisest, not the safest of the choices. We played DE, knight e4, queen c7, and it looks like everything is more or less fine. Queen c7 got the queen off the d file, so he doesn't have to worry about any d takes c5, knight c5, knight c5, or knight f6, bishop h7, rook d8 tricks. And he's ready to just play either knight takes e4 and bishop to b7 next, or bishop to b7 straight away. Hope for some exchanges in the center, and come out of the opening with a more or less equal position. But it turns out that Bologan can grab the initiative here and go with it. So he plays d5, slightly analogous to the Nimzovich-Tarash game, where Tarash with black played d4 and then engaged in the double bishop sacrifice. Now there won't be a double bishop sacrifice here, but nevertheless, the d5 break is still very powerful. It unshields, or it unleashes the power of this bishop on b2, but there's a second point as well, which is that it gives the light-squared bishop another diagonal, as we'll see. Okay, black took, and now white also had a second good alternative, which was to play knight takes f6 check. If bishop f6, well then there's no sacrifice, white simply regains the pawn, and after d6, this pawn is quite good. It's tying black down a bit, and white has a pleasant edge here. It's not winning, but he is definitely better. If instead knight takes f6, then again c takes d5. Taking is not possible now because of bishop to h7 check, and then rook takes d5. So bishop to g4, and now white can either play it safe with bishop to e2, which should be good for an edge, or you can play the more feisty, the sharper bishop to e5. Now, if the queen moves away, white plays d6, and he's very, very happy there. So bishop to d6 is positionally forced. The drawback, obviously, is that it allows this capture on f6, and now black can choose which piece to take. If he takes the bishop right away, then king h1 prepares for the possibility of bishop takes f3, and white is actually doing quite well. So the passed d pawn is blockaded, but it is an asset. The big thing, of course, is that black's kingside is very vulnerable. If, on the other hand, black just grabs on f3 and then takes on f6, well, again, king to h1. And this could transpose, of course. The other variation, if black were to take on f3, we would reach the same position. And now the black kingside is quite exposed. If black plays bishop to takes h2, here white seems to just win immediately with d6. Now, if queen takes d6, bishop h7 check wins the queen in the game. If the queen, or if black doesn't take on d6, then white grabs the bishop on h2. And finally, after bishop takes d6, there's bishop to c4, threatening queen to g6 check. In case of king to h8, then queen to f5 threatens both queen takes f6 check, which both probably gives both the option of mating the black king and taking on d6. And of course, the one might lead to the other. But there's also the secondary threat, though a huge threat, of bishop to d3. So for instance, if bishop to f4, or let's say bishop to e5 to protect the f6 pawn and save the bishop, then simply bishop to d3, and queen to h7 mate is unstoppable. In fact, it can't even be delayed. All right, so let me put in a little null move entry there. Okay, so back to the game. So it was d5, e takes d5, and we were looking at knight takes f6, and we noted that white certainly had good prospects for an advantage there too. In fact, he probably just simply does have an advantage there. But Mulligan played c takes d5, and this is certainly not bad either, and it led to a quick victory. Black now played knight takes d5, and after bishop to c4, as advertised, we see that the white bishop has switched to the second diagonal, and now we can have white's diagonal pieces operating on three adjacent diagonals. So the bishop from c4 is cutting across here, the bishop on b2 cuts through to here, and the white queen is in turn also enjoying some very, very nice possibilities once the knight on e4 moves out of the way. Well, now let's figure out what black can do about this mess. All these bishops, and the queen too, pointing evilly at the black king side leaves him in quite a precarious position. Now, the knight, of course, also has to be taken care of. And in the game, Movsesian tried knight to b4, hitting the queen with tempo. So that certainly makes sense. It's quite logical, but there are alternatives. One move that makes a pretty fair amount of sense is to bring the knight back to f6. Just take the pawn, run home, block the diagonal, and again keep pieces around the king. The problem with this, though, is that after knight to g3, white is going to follow up with knight to f5, and this is also pretty awkward for black. Maybe it's not winning for white, but certainly white has more than enough for the pawn. I mean, it's probably clearly better at this point. The best move might be knight to f4, and there's a key tactical difference with the game. We'll come back to that in a moment, but let's look at some other ideas. So white could also play knight to g3 here. And now a couple of, again, just random possibilities for black. So one move is to play b5, trying to kick away one of those Horwitz bishops. And then I think that bishop takes g7 is at least very interesting. Maybe black should take, and then after bishop takes h6, the position looks pretty dangerous for black. I didn't really investigate it too carefully, though. Maybe there's some hopes for black here. I'm not sure. If king takes g7, though, then white is winning. Knight f5 check, knight takes c7, b takes c4, and now queen f5. So threatening, well, it's not really clear what's being threatened just yet, but black is really tied down. Like if the knight on d7 moves, then perhaps the queen goes to f6, and then maybe rook to d6 is the follow-up. So let's say rook a7 here, rook f to e1, and black can hardly move a muscle here, or move a piece at any rate. He's up a full bishop, but I think white is winning at this point. All right, so that's b5. Another idea is just to play bishop to b7, bring out another piece, maybe try to capture on f3 to get rid of at least one potential attacker. But the bad news for black is that the knight on f3 is maybe the least harmful, the least worrisome of white's pieces. So knight f5 once again, bishop f6 covering g7, but now knight takes h6 and queen f5. All right, so this is well, it comes with a double attack. Threatens a d7 and threatens f6. Black can take on b2, rook d7. So black's still up a piece, but f4 is under attack. It's defended by the queen for the moment, but f7 is also a big problem. So queen to b8. And here white could even just take time out and play something like rook f to d1. Let's say bishop takes f3, bishop f7 check, king h8, and rook 1 to d6. And black's got two extra pieces here, but just to look around the black king, you would hardly know that. I mean, white's attacking with all four of his pieces. Black has no, or practically no, useful defenders, and this is completely winning for white. So even with the better moves at this point for black, like knight f4, probably he's still in serious trouble. Well, after knight to b4, white is winning. And the question is just, do you see how he's winning? So it's a little tactical that does the job here. And the answer is that, well, white would like to play queen to c3, but after queen to c3, black plays knight f6, and he's okay. So really, the thing to do then is to play rook takes d7. If knight takes c2, of course, white just plays rook takes queen, and he's up a piece. That's an easy win. If black plays bishop takes d7, it's going to come to essentially the same thing as in the game. So queen takes d7 is what happened, and now queen c3. And this is like our earlier example with the Danish gambit, where white played queen to g4, and after g6 played queen to d4. The big problem for black there and here is that he can't play f6. The bishop on c4 pins the pawn, so black is really in a world of trouble here. Bishop f6 is hopeless, just knight takes f6, g takes f6, queen f6, and then it's even more like that Danish gambit example. So let's go ahead and put those moves in, and you can see that black has no defense to queen h8 mate. He could stop queen g7 mate by playing queen g4, but no answer to that one. So in the game then, black played queen to g4, but now it's simple interference, knight f to g5. Not the other way around, because then black would play bishop to f6. But now if bishop f6, knight takes f6 is decisive. Oh, so let me go back to this position. So here with knight f4. So we already mentioned that knight to g3 is very strong. But here the combination with rook takes d7 doesn't work, because queen d7, queen c3, queen g4. And now with knight f to g5, queen takes g2 is just checkmate. But even without that, black is simply up the exchange and a pawn here, and white's attack is inadequate. So black is already winning. But in this version, of course, there's no knight on f4, so there's no queen takes g2 mate. So black is just completely lost. Movsesian played on a few more moves, had to give up the queen. There's just no other choice, and then bishop to f6. So Boligan switches the queen over to f3, hitting the rook on a8. After bishop takes b2, he could take the rook maybe, but even better is simply knight f7. So right now, white is up a queen for a rook and a bishop, but he's also threatening the rook on a8. He's also threatening various lethal discoveries with the knight moving away. And indeed, that's what happened. b5, trying to get rid of the bishop that sets up the discoveries, but knight h6 double check, king h7, queen takes f8, b takes c4, and now queen c5. And here, with a queen and two pawns against a pair of bishops, black decided that there were no tricks left for him to try, and resigned. So, very nice game by Boligan, and I think a nice complement to the earlier games that we saw. Again, very nicely illustrating the power of the Horwitz bishops. And we saw some, again, ideas harkening back to the earlier examples. So, for instance, this d5 breakthrough had its own distinctives, like the idea of giving the bishop on d3 the other Horwitz diagonal on from a2 to g8. But it was like the Nimzovich-Tarash game in the sense of unleashing the bishop on b2. And then later on, again, we had this kind of parallel situation with the Danish gambit example. So these themes, I mean, once you start to see them, you get used to seeing a few of them and see them a few times. Their power and your ability to use them becomes increasingly second nature. So hopefully, by presenting a number of examples, some with some similarities, I'll have helped you to be able to use this in your own games. So that'll do it. Next time, probably we'll get back to the quick Rui series, but again, time out every once in a while for something conceptual is, I think, worthwhile too. So I will see you next time. Until then, take care. And again, if you think of if you guys find out the story behind the title of Horwitz Bishops, I would really appreciate that. So as I said, I spent quite a bit of time trying to find out why they're called Horwitz Bishops, but without any success. So those of you with a historic bent or a research, an inclination to do some research, please let me know. I'd love to find out the answer. So thanks a lot. See you next time. Bye-bye.